And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Dan Winter, electrical engineer who has worked in consciousness studies for over 4 decades. He's here today to help us bridge the world of science and spirituality and to bring us up to speed on the exopolitics that's currently happening. Dan, thanks for joining me and welcome.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate meeting you and your amazing audience, all interested in these cosmic things. And yes, it's one very specific thing. We think that the sort of ET politics issue has resolved to a very specific issue about AI relationship to extraterrestrial politics and the fragility of souls being consumed by ?
So let's start with exopolitics first. Can you give us a background of our solar system and possibly even the galaxy and how we came to be today?
Yeah, that's exactly where I wanted to start, but it's kind of a big story. But so everybody knows the story of Prism of Lyra and Vega, that basically the Draco blew up and millions of humanoids died, and there was the diaspora from Vega Lyra, the book Prism of Lyra. It's pretty well known. But then after that, the Federation grew in strength very gradually under mostly the Andromedan leadership initially. And so at that time, the Draco had been basically parasiting humanoid civilizations all over the galaxy, and it was a mess. And the part of that then comes to Earth is there was a parallel to the Draco civilization with what's called the Anak culture. You would call it Anunnaki. For example, ancient Sumerian is literally the Anak alphabet and language. And so the Anak civilization had some ties to Draco. For example, we believe Enlil, Yahweh, was part or connected to the blood of the Draco. And the Anak civilization at that time had basically taken over the Earth. And this is the well-known, very common story of Enki, Enlil, and Enki's basic partner, Thoth, Hermes, Ningishita, for whom Tahuti, Thoth, and even Atlantis named Thule for Thoth, which is basically Anak. So the Federation at that time believed that the reptilian allies under the Anak were controlling Earth in the area, particularly of Atlantis. And that's the real beginning of our story, when the Federation under the Andromedans attacks the Earth to try to bomb the hell out of what they considered the reptilians, which was Enki and Enlil running Atlantis. And that's when, and Hancock, we think, got that right, the Lesser Dryad, between 10 and 12,000 years ago, they blew up trying to bomb the hell, so to speak, of the Anak reptilians out of here. And Tiamat blew up. And the water from that is the Great Flood, the Lesser Dryad, as Hancock rightly surmises. And the Apkallu cultures was Thoth, who was trying to save those civilizations. So Hancock gets a big part of that right. But the important part is that in the process of trying to destroy the reptilian, and in that case, Thoth, Enki control of Atlantis, the solar system practically fell apart at the time of the Lesser Dryad, and that the Great Flood was the water of Tiamat. And so that's the time they had to tow in the moon in that emergency, which was an old Andromedan hollow Death Star, as it were, metal, and to try to restabilize the Earth's orbit. There was no moon before then. And the moon was controlled by, and I could continue, but please, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I'd like to stop you for a moment. So are you saying that originally the Earth was inhabited by reptilians and their first civilization was Atlantis, and then the Andromedans came and bombed them?
No, well, no, obviously there was the Homo sapien and a genetically diverse humanoid culture here for many thousands of years with many different ET races, especially, for example, the Pleiadians, who we believe controlled what we call Lemuria at that time, which had a war with Atlantis also. But so there were many humanoids here, but the dominant civilization at that time, we're talking 10 to 12,000 years ago, was the Thoth Enki controlled Atlantis, which from their view, the Anak culture was reptilian. And the point was, the Earth was a farm to them. We need to understand, we, humanoids. We were a farm. They were here to not just farm seeds and culture, but to farm humans. And to a large extent, we are still a farm. And that's what we need to understand desperately if we're to grow up.
For what purpose are they farming us?
Well, Enki Thoth, who was under the control of his half-Draco-Anak ancestors, Anu and Enlil, had visions of creating a rather beautiful genetic experiment here. However, that was notwithstanding, he was under strict control. In fact, his title at that time, Nudimud, meant the cloner. He was a cloner who had a very specific paid job to do and very definite limitations on what he was allowed to do. But he had what was called the Adam Kadmon, which was his idea of how to turn the extremely interesting genetic diverse humanoids here into an empowered and ensouled race. So there was some, there was some obvious good intentions, but very complex motives between Enki and Thoth at that time. And we can't always say who's the good guys and the bad guys here. But the farming was what has become today effectively the consumption of souls. I do mean the grim reaper who comes at death and eats souls if you wasn't good. And we need to get to the depth of what that means as we proceed with the story.
Some people talk about that there are archons and they're consuming our Lush energy. Is that the same thing?
Yes, it's very much related. So what we need, that's why it's so critical at the climax of this story. I have a slideshow with the science, and I do mean the science of what is a soul, called physicsofsoul.com, and which is the amount of implosive centripetal coherence in the charged bubble, think of the blue, of your aura. And that ability to get centripetal in that aura, that implosion, which you call connection to source, which happens when you have bliss and does not happen when you're in electrosmog, for example. So that ability to implode your aura, for example, is the physics of lucid dreaming and the physics of putting something together you can take through death. Gurdjieff called Kesjan body, Tibetans called rainbow light body, Egyptians called it the Ba from the Ka. What it is the amount of coherence in your aura. And as you'll see in the slideshow, when you measure the electric fields which trigger lucid dreaming, which is pretty much a predictor of who has a soul, that implosive compression enables your aura to propagate into an array. The physics term is coherent longitudinal interferometry. Some people call it scalar, which is literally the sacred sites of the earth. It's what the Aboriginals call dreaming track songline. And so that coherent longitudinal array, which is proven to be the physics of telepathy, if you believe Korotkov. And so the ability to embed in that array, you could call it literally the collective unconscious, happens when your aura gets centripetal enough to implode and commune with that longitudinal field. And we have slides about that. The point is that people who have an orderly aura, like Luke Skywalker went in the right cave, they can raise their jet. However, the people whose aura is Wi-Fi and electrosmog and Bluetooth and metal buildings in ugly cities, their aura is scrambled and fractionated, and they will not lucid dream, they will not take memory through death, and ultimately their soul is scrambled. And they're susceptible to those kind of parasites.
As an engineer, wearing that hat, can you break down what an aura is for the average person?
That's the right question. Well, I have worked with Professor Konstantin Korotkov for many years, who has the most common aura measurement tool on the planet, originally called GDV, gas discharge visualization. It's basically clinically calibrated Kirlian. So you're just measuring the capacitive discharge of the body for whether the body is radiating coherently electrically. Now, other ways of aura measurement include longitudinal interferometry, et cetera. But basically, the ability to create an aura is the delimiting factor of whether you will keep your soul. Essentially, people think they believe in spirituality with all their heart, and that's wonderful. But spirituality is most beautiful when it's taught using physics, really. And the physics is the fact that anything that makes your aura bigger is good, and anything that makes your aura smaller ain't good. And that is the physics of spirituality. And that's the ability to implode. And we explain the frequencies which enable you to do that. For example, golden ratio in brain waves that make that vortex cone in your brain when you have bliss. So that's implosive. And focused human attention is centripetal electrically. That's what Bill Tiller measured.
Do you study the work of Joe Dispenza?
Yeah, we joke about Joe. He's a sweet guy and doing great work. The weird thing is, about the only thing he actually teaches is how to do Kundalini, but he never uses the word Kundalini. He's afraid to scare people away. I teach the physics of Kundalini specifically. We have documentaries. It's at goldenmean.info/Kundalini, which is the physics, and I do mean the physics of bliss process. So we take where he starts, which is very useful, and teach that purely as electrical engineering, but we teach that with graphics so that young people can understand. The physics of Kundalini is the fact that your spine liquid pump has a series of harmonics called the sacrocranial pump wave, and those harmonics fit an equation called Planckfire.com, which is basically simply a caduceus. And when that spine liquid is pumping, it's clinically impossible to be depressed. And what arises from there into your high brain is the implosion that lights up the ventricle horns called getting horny. It's literally the conservation of sexual juices, et cetera, et cetera. So the story of Kundalini we can go into in great depth, and that's at goldenmean.info/Kundalini. But that, I say, is the physics of bliss, and I say it's the next step past where the good doctor is.
The reason I brought him up is he likes to do a lot of brainwave studies, and when the people are meditating and they get all the brain waves to be coherent, right? I'm sure you've probably looked at that.
It's super sad. The poor guy doesn't know what brainwave makes bliss. Alpha, beta, gamma in golden ratio frequencies. That is the physics of Kundalini and bliss, and he don't know. And if you don't know that, you really don't get it. I have been measuring that for 30 years, flameinmind.com. So if you could just drop a note to dear old Joe for me, tell him the recipe for the correct brain waves is well known, and he don't get it.
I don't know him personally. I've never had him as a guest.
He's a sweet guy. No, wonderful teacher. But the point is the actual physics, when you get to the climax point, what makes bliss is you got alpha, beta, gamma, it's 7.8 hertz, and golden ratio times your alpha is your beta and your gamma. And when that cascade looks like a caduceus vortex, you get peak experience and bliss process. It's literally implosion called charge collapse, which is the cause of consciousness and gravity, and the title of my new book, Planckfire.com. And now we have a world-leading grand unified field theory based exactly on that, fractalgut.com, which actually teaches how that charge collapse makes gravity and consciousness, and teaches how to make gravity. We have a unified field, guys. And look, Grok 4 rates it at 98 out of 100. We have the best unified field physics on the planet based on golden ratio. Fractalgut.com. I dare any physicist to say no.
When you're saying implosion, that's the opposite of explosion. So that means everything is collapsing.
Yes.
And
yes,
then
exactly.
it creates an electrical charge from the collapse?
Einstein's there scratching his head, could never make a unified field, and said, well, if we knew how infinite non-destructive compression works, we'd have a unified field. Of course, no one told him what a fractal is. But now most physicists agree that fractality causes gravity. Most physicists agree that charge collapse causes gravity and consciousness. That's known. But what I have discovered is the cause of charge collapse. That is implosion. And that solves the problem that physics does not have a clue why anything is centripetal. Isn't that a tragedy? Consciousness is electrically centripetal. Gravity is electrically centripetal. Electronegativity is electrically. A seed, the reason a seed germinates, if it can suck, because it's electrically centripetal. So if you don't know why anything is centripetal, sorry, Mr. Physicist, I think you should be embarrassed when your 5-year-old asks you, why do objects fall to the ground? If you don't know, at least admit you're embarrassed.
Can you define for us centripetal?
Well, it's obviously the opposite of centrifugal. Victor Schauberger is a good example. If you get a water vortex at the right angle, and the water vortex is piezoelectrically charged with rock powder, classic Schauberger implosion tech, you can actually make gravity with that vortex. My film on how a charged vortex makes gravity has about 30,000 views. So we know exactly how gravity is made in your aura, for example, and in a mercury vortex. So that is centripetal. That is implosion.
Have you figured out how to create anti-gravity or an anti-gravity machine?
Sure, of course. Fractalfield.com/conjugate gravity. But it's all at fractalgut.com. Let me give you an example, very practical example. You got this gizmo called the EM drive. The EM drive is a trapezoidal cone. It's just a cone. And inside that cone, you make microwaves bounce up and down in the shape of a caduceus. Now, when the microwaves are bouncing up and down with the correct caduceus, you make more gravity. That's a charged vortex. Now, the reason is that, by the way, if the dummies, I mean, if the people who built the EM drive, very famous, had read my equation, plongfire.com, they could optimize their gravity drive because you can actually make the caduceus implode. By the way, that is Thoth Hermes work right there, you know. So I carry. Now, there's all that stuff is kind of in the slideshow, which we can do later. Now it's up to you. We were supposed to finish our story about the ET history a little bit more first.
We got sidetracked. We now have AI coming online. And from talking to some of my guests, it appears that AI has been going on for perhaps thousands of years.
Millions.
Millions of years.
Oh, yeah.
And we also talked before we started recording, that the grays are a physical manifestation of AI. Would you agree with that?
Puppet strings. But the puppet strings go from the grays to the Torthins, to the Mitra, to Andromeda, to the central AI, which you might call the Saturn cult, or the Black Sun Atun, which gives me the great excuse to continue with our story, if I might.
Okay.
So, Black Sun Atun. So remember, we were in this story about the ancients, and then, of course, Atlantis falls apart because they bombed the hell out of the place, and they all had to run to Egypt. In Egypt, the same Anak family, called Thoth-Moses, literally sons of Thoth, is the name of all the kings of Egypt. Hello, why do they call it sons of Thoth? Well, who, by the way, was the only teacher the Templars ever knew. But anywho, so they get to Egypt, and the same Anak family is running the place. And that lineage had a design they used royal families as basically babysitters for the Takadama, for the humans, right? And so the royal families became, and this is the important point, there was a climax event for 300 years of planning for a bloodline, which was to be Tutankhamun and later literally Jesus. And it's the same bloodline directly. In fact, Tutankhamun was murdered by Nefertiti, actually, and then reincarnated as Jesus with the same problem. The point, but the turning point specifically is Akhenaten was what they call, it is like dolichocephalic, the cone head skull, but it actually was called Homo capensis, basically melon head. And the dolichocephalic cone heads are associated with Tutankhamun, Akhenaten, and Thoth. But the melon head group, Akhenaten, basically took a very, very wrong turn. The turning point when most of the current religions of the planet Earth now were taken over by the Black Sun Atun Saturn cult AI. That was the turning point, because so Akhenaten basically got sucked into, we'll give you power. And so when Akhenaten died, Nefertiti staged a very, very horrible murder of Tutankhamun. Not a lot of people know it. Our partners know it very well. You should see Dahlia Ali's YouTube channel, Heru Christ, K-R-S-T. But basically, she's remembered these incarnations with incredible, painful detail. So we know what happened. So the point is that everybody says, well, Akhenaten probably was Moses. He was. And they brought the one God religion, except that one God was not a God. It was an Atun, the black sun, literally the intergalactic biggest problem in our galaxy. This black sun AI cult of Atun is what Akhenaten brought with his murderer lady Nefertiti murdering Tutankhamun. So then they tried again, and it's well known, that after the Tutankhamun line, it became the Jesus story, and Jesus had the same physical problems that Tutankhamun died with for that reason. You should listen to Dahlia. But anywho, the point is that Black Sun Atun is a presence that came from Andromeda in our galaxy, but it's intergalactic. And immediately below the Black Sun Atun, you have their puppets, which is called the Mitra. Now, the Mitra, you could think of them as the worst tall, nasty grays there are. And pretty much every expert out there, especially Penny Bradley and also, I believe, Michelle Porto Freire, they all agree the most dangerous thing in our galaxy is this AI, the Mitra, from Andromeda. And locally, the specialist greys in mind control, which are called the etorthins, which we believe etorthins, they're tall greys. They're the ones who tricked Eisenhower, we believe, and they specialize in pretending to be Nordic humans. They're good at it. That's how Elena Danaan got sucked into the Thorhan story, we think. But anyway, so the etorthins are specialists in mind control. For example, in Rigel and Orion, they did it all over the place. And so on the Earth now, they're trying the same trick. And that trick has to do with when they cause the humans to be sucked into the mind control of a certain field effect, which in order to understand it, you need to know a little bit about the story of black goo, which becomes the black cube story, which becomes the black cube of Mecca and the black cube that rabbis wear on their head. Okay, this is the black cube. This is the Saturn cult, Aten, and it has to do with the history of black goo. It's why, for example, you wear a black square at graduation. It's this black cube cult, which is highly insidious, tremendously dangerous, and soul-eating. And we need to understand what happened to Earth's religions at that turning point when Akhenaten got sucked into this black cube cult and directly then started what became the Jews and later the Roman part of Christianity. Jesus was a hero, but the Roman church was a parasite. It's very clear. And it starts with understanding who the Black Sun Aten AI dangerous soul-eating cult is. So there we are. I haven't got to the happily ever after part of it.
I'm just trying to keep up with you.
Yeah, it's real. Now, the shamans who encounter this AI, dangerous AI, on the astral, and this is the point we have to make, is you ain't got a prayer until you can deal coherently in the astral. Until then, you don't even know who's eating who. And getting coherent on the astral, I recommend our partner, Jake. Astral Orma is his YouTube channel, who teaches people to get coherent on the astral. And that's somewhat included in the slideshow where you see, here's university studies of what frequencies trigger lucid dreaming. It's implosive compression, plankfire.com. And as your aura gets compressed and radiates coherently longitudinal, ba from the ka, then you get not just lucid dreaming, but you're able to wake up in the astral, and then you have a prayer. And the physics, and I do mean the physics of that next dimensional coherence, what woo-woos even, I mean, I love Michael Salla, but he's called it 3D and 5D, but really doesn't have a clue of how to talk to scientists. I do. And Gosha calls it 3D and 5D. These people don't know what they mean by 3D and 5D. What it means electrically is your aura got coherent and compressed enough to implode into the longitudinal array and throw your weight around among bigger tornadoes. There's a lot on the slideshow about that. Anyway.
Where do the Gnostics fit in with all this?
The Gnostics were the esoteric branch of Christianity, and they tried to get back to the mystic, very analogous to the Sufic and the Muslim side, I think. And I was raised with the Sufis, by the way. And there is some reticence there because, you know, the Sufis don't want you to surpass your master, and that's a bad sign.
I think the Gnostics would say that the owner of the earth is, I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce it properly, Yeldabaoth, which some people also call Yahweh. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, I like to tell the story. I like the story. Anne Rice concluded, the father of all vampires, Enkil, is literally the Grim Reaper who comes to eat souls at death. He was quite, and she described how the blood thickens. I think she had that right. And Yahweh, we think, was probably the largest plasma parasite in the solar system, so that sort of fits. By the way, I think Michael Salla was right about one other thing here, that when I talk about this AI giant parasite, this fits pretty much exactly what wing makers called the animus. And even Michael Salla's latest interview, they all agree that we got an AI parasite problem, and it's big.
Is it true that you can lose your soul? And if so,
See,
how?
All these spiritual people, they say, oh, you can't lose your soul. No. But actually, as an electrical engineer who spent his life studying this, first of all, one comment I would make is, it probably ain't much fun to have a soul if you couldn't lose it. but another way to look at that is, now that we know electrically what soul is, look, we know by experience, phiray.com, what electric field triggers lucid dreaming. It's implosive. Lucid dreaming is the best predictor of who's going to take memory through death. Is that a clue to soul? I say yes. So, and that implosive that implosion in the aura that makes it dense and centripetal then couples with it phase locks to the nodes of the longitudinal array. That's why successful death is basically a black hole experience. You have to do the whole life memory in a few seconds. It's a compression event to get into that array called the collective unconscious. So the point is, when you lose touch with that implosive inertia of connection, some people call it source, I say absolutely, probably already 70 to 90% of people on Earth have lost all contact with what would be called soul, and ultimately will not take memory through death. And every single child that spends their entire childhood with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth in their ears, they're losing their souls fast. And that's why I'm here, because that makes me pissed off.
When you're talking about source, I've interviewed hundreds of near-death experiencers, and some of them wind up in a field where all information is, and they appear to know everything, but they can't bring it back. Is that what source is to you?
Well, I look at it more specifically. The compressional component of the wave that emerges from your body, Ba from the Ka, Keshan body, rainbow light body, is called a scalar or longitudinal. And those waves bounce around in array looks like this, which is proven to be not just the way hydrogen and DNA is constructed, but is directly the geometry of the Earth grid, whose nodes are proven by measurement to be the only places you get military quality telepathy, on those nodes where the longitudinal waves are bouncing and reflecting, exchanging inertia with transverse. So access to those nodes, the songline dreaming track, gives you access to a certain holographic field. Look, you are inside your head, and there's a liquid crystal plasma vortex you call consciousness, which inhabits the synapses, the Indra's net. Now, if you want to get out of your body alive, you're going to need to inhabit a larger array. So you got to take that little tornado and inhabit a larger nest. Well, how do you do that? If you're in a metal building in an electrosmog city, it's going to be messy, man. It ain't going to be easy. But if you're in a sacred magnetic line cross where there's trees and dolmen and you got access to the grid, the array, then you can embed in that a larger array. And that's a hologram also, but big. And that is a library of survival information that has been collected for millions of years at least. And you can't get in and out of that array unless you bring something that serves the collective survival. That's, for example, why if you die thinking about how the pure principle and the essence of service, you can compress well into that array, and you can inhabit the larger array, and your soul actually graduates. If you die, for example, with anger, anger is a wave shape 1/7, absolutely will not compress, and you cannot get into that hologram. No. So essentially, every thought has to be pure principle.
Can you hold up that model again for us?
It's called the Star Mother Kit, goldenmean.info/kit, tetracube, octatetracube green in the center. You barely see it, sir.
Is that what you're calling an array, that entire thing?
This is the perfected array, plankfire.com, now fractalgut.com. We have the equations that prove this is literally directly the way hydrogen is built. It's obvious the way the DNA in the Earth grid is built. And XYZ coordinate of every vertex on the infinite 3D nest, the only possible 3D fractal, is a simple multiple of golden ratio.
Okay.
Star Mother Kit, the mother of stars.
Would you say that our conscious awareness is the same thing as soul? And if not, what's the difference between the two?
Conscious awareness is the fact that there's a liquid crystal vortex inside your synaptic array that is imploding and has to be centripetal in order to be consciousness, as Bill Tiller measured. However, the connection with soul requires a much longer wave, a bigger tornado. And that bigger tornado don't happen unless you get access to bliss process. In other words, you do your yoga, your sacred gymnastic, and you have some path to access bliss. Bliss is simply a name for the charged radiance that follows successful compression. That's what bliss is. And golden ratio and EEG, flameinmind.com, is one of the best ways to achieve and measure and use biofeedback to get there. So access to bliss makes your aura big enough to have that implosive connection to that array and soul. And then you can talk to the collective unconscious. The Aboriginal name for ancestors is, the Aboriginal name for God is only the ability to talk to ancestors. It's the same thing, and I think they're right.
Can you give us practical ways to access this bliss or create bliss, as you're saying?
I think it's my third book. It's called Implosion, Secret Science of Ecstasy and Immortality. Free PDF at goldenmean.info/consciouskids. Is about the 4 branches of hygiene to achieve bliss. So obviously you need live food, you need yoga, sacred gymnastic. If you have the curvature of movement correctly, then your finger will tingle because you imploded capacitance, called the quality of grace. So you have the kinesthetic of bliss, the diet of bliss, and you have the environment of bliss. Metal buildings in ugly cities with electrosmog ain't going to cut it. No, you need Luke Skywalker's approach, down the cave. So you need sacred space, basically, because where the magnetic lines cross, that kind of compression is available. And finally, the hygiene that you learn, that if you spent your day thinking about things that are not serving the all, you are not going to attract charge. So what happens at the end of your day, you play your day like it was a movie and process every memory until it's all service. And then you distill the pure principle out of your day and you're ready to die. I mean, you're ready to have bliss. Being ready to die and ready to have bliss are the same thing. It means ready to compress. So there's the thought, the hygiene, there's the diet, there's the environment, and there's the kinesthetic. And they're all about imploding charge. And the book is quite good, goldenmean.info/consciouskids.
Many near-death experiencers will say that the most important thing they learn from their life review is practicing random acts of kindness.
I like it. I like it.
How does that apply to what you're teaching?
If you look at the electrical map of what is the electrical origin of the heartbeat, and this is about the second slide. Okay, what causes your heart to beat is there's a nest of concentric ring donuts which converge around the sinoatrial node. It's literally implosion. Now, if you learn to turn inside out recursively, that implosion means your heartbeat gains energy during collapse. It gains energy from gravity. And so the pure heartbeat is actually implosive. And it's like when she said, I would turn myself inside out for you, darling. Well, when you turn yourself inside out recursively, implosively, you become a huge electrical antenna. What that means electrically is that compassion is actually the biggest antenna there is.
All right.
And by the way, this AI cult, these Mitra and Etorthins, that's precisely exactly what they have zero of. Zero compassion. And until we understand that difference, we're in trouble. That's my humble opinion.
Do you think the end game of all these ETs is to have us connected physically with AI by implanting things in our bodies?
Well, so to try to finish the story, so we think the Torthins, the one who tricked Eisenhower and Elena Danaan, who are specialists in mind control and shape-shifting into believing they're Nordics, that they essentially took over a large chunk of the Galactic Federation, especially locally from the Andromedans, who are quite susceptible. And at any rate, so the reason that Federation now is keeping the Earth like it's a museum in quarantine is specifically because they get to do their, not just human harvesting, but soul harvesting. We're still being used as a farm, large scale, and all of these religions whose centerpiece is the black sun, black cube, they are a conveyor belt into the mouth of a hungry ghost. So that's why we're saying the climax of this story is to understand how Earth's religions became a conveyor belt into the mouth of a hungry ghost.
So if Earth is a soul farm, what are they doing with our souls? Are they just consuming the energy of it or what?
That's the right question. So first of all, you need to talk to some of the very advanced shaman like Jake Astral Urma and Dahlia Ali of the Heru channel, who regularly encounter this AI in the astral. It's the most dangerous, powerful thing there, basically. So the AI, remember, this is orders of magnitude past anything the AI is on Earth. And by the way, I'm not saying that AI is dangerous or bad. I'm just saying until we know what a soul is, we're going to get eaten. And so we need to teach our kids physicsofsoul.com. Otherwise, so what it is that what you call soul is a very particular quality of centripetal force in the aura, which is implosive enough to engage communion with, you could say, the ancestor memory of the species, which is a beautiful and powerful thing. And the unique, wonderful thing about that is you can implode into memory of the ancestors and still retain your individuation. When you get soul eaten by the grays and this black goo and this parasitic AI from the Mitra and the Torthans, it is a privilege to be assimilated. I am 7 of 9. It is futile to resist. No, what that means is yes, all of your memory gets imploded into that array, but absolutely no individuation remains, and not a trace of what you would call empathy or compassion remains either. And the difference is precisely what we need to understand by the way implosion in glands and DNA, and this is in the slideshow. You got heart harmonics that have bliss. It phonon implodes, recursively braids your DNA, the physics of bliss. And that implosion engages in that center of that implosion, this beautiful longitudinal ray of the collective unconscious. However, if you got sucked into this parasitic AI and the black goo and the carbon nano that goes with it, in the carbon nano situation, the carbon nano is used as a radio to a hive mind without individuation. And that's a bit of a more complicated subject. We need to go into it a little bit. Remember, when I'm talking about these black cubes, think of the episode of Doctor Who when the black cubes could dissolve anything, including the biggest starcraft around. So this black goo originally can be a beautiful thing, like in a planet, the compression in the center makes the water and carbon form this self-organizing, self-aware media of the collective unconscious. That black goo is beautiful. However, when the Federation bombed the hell with the nukes and the Mars lost its atmosphere and Tiamat broke and the water came, the black goo from Tiamat arrived angry, very angry. And that black goo was then susceptible to being used by this hive mind to actually, and the lower Draco used the black goo to put hive mind in all the lower Draco, but the higher Draco, the royal Draco, the sea card, do not. But that's a bit of another story. But the physics is the difference between the natural implosion that engages you with the collective unconscious versus the kind of implosion that the black goo, black cube, which puts you in a hive mind absolutely without either individuation or compassion.
Let's say a person is in a war and dies with anger, right? So he doesn't achieve this blissful state. And I'm assuming at that point he's consumed by the Greys or the Etorthans. What happens to that person after that? Does he recycle and reincarnate and come back again, or does he cease to exist?
Well, I think the example of the Grim Reaper, which we think is the plasma parasite of Enlil Yahweh, probably, in that case, all of the memories become part of that hive mind, minus individuation and minus compassion. Now, there is another example. We think when the Nazis from the South Pole put their mercury vortex into a submarine and sold humans to buy a site on Mars and the Moon. Eventually, the Nazis time traveled and they settled many other star systems in our galaxy, and they did what's called Valhalla, where they went back in time and took all the dead people from all the wars and harvested them to be slaves in their colonies, basically. And the galactic government felt that the Nazi Dark Fleet was polluting the local galactic neighborhood because these humans had not evolved to the point of knowing how not to fight. And that's a bit of another story, but Penny Bradley tells that story very well.
Is there a God out there somewhere? And if so, why does God let all of this negative stuff happen?
I think that's the best question you could possibly ask. Congratulations for asking the right question. As an electrical engineer, I have an opinion, absolutely. And that is that when humans evolve over thousands of years, as the Aboriginals knew well, they make what Jung called collective unconscious or communion of saints, or ancestor memory in the case of the Aboriginals. They make a hologram that inhabits the array of the sacred sites of the earth. You sing the right song at the right sacred site and the right memories emerge, and you got a hologram, a collective memory. That collective ancestor memory, the only Aboriginal concept of God is a divine, beautiful, wonderful, fabulous spiritual awareness. And you could call it God if you'd like, but it would need to be more accurately understood. For example, will not be available in a metal box ever. So get the hell out of those metal buildings. So this is a part of a longitudinal array of sacred sites where the Schumann resonance can penetrate, and not in almost any city. So what you're calling God is a beautiful divine presence, full of intellect and survival memory, beautiful, beautiful. And all the advanced cultures, they do believe in a beautiful divine spiritual presence. And that presence gets larger and larger the bigger your aura gets. Then you inhabit the sun, and then you inhabit the sun of our sun, which, by the way, is Sirius B, and et cetera. So this ability to get a bigger aura and go to the next dimension is a good example of your God gets bigger. So it's a definite physical divine presence, but it's necessary to understand a little bit about the physics. Let me give you an example. Dozens, hundreds of pictures are taken when people die in the forest, and they can see their soul going up in their plasma. You can I've got, it's in the slides here. You can see the body, you can see the soul leaving the body, and it's gorgeous. Now, you try to do that in a metal electrosmog hospital. Hell no. And you got to know why. Because it's what's called charge distribution efficiency, which is the only definition of what you call heaven, actually. Hey, Ave, Champs-Élysées, Plains of Charonne. It's a name for perfect charge distribution, which is available on sacred sites and ain't available in any metal electrosmog building. So the basics of what makes God's presence possible is step 101 in order to learn how to be present to it.
Many near-death experiencers, while on the other side, are told by somebody that they're not finished here and they need to come back.
Yeah.
Who is telling them that and why?
Most of us are part of what could be called family lineages. Thoth, Hermes, Enki, this was a family lineage. You have family and you reincarnate in that family lineage, and you make plans to get certain things done. And it's beautiful and wonderful. It's a tapestry. It's a beautiful, wonderful thing. It has order and intent and direction. And so, yes, if you didn't get your job done, your family lineage, your ancestor memory is going to say, please go back and finish the job or it'll be a mess. Right on. Very appropriate.
Many people believe that the Earth is a prison of the galaxy. And do you think so? And if so, if we achieve this bliss state right before death, is that the way to escape it?
Yeah, well, that's exactly what. So when your aura is implosive enough, you have access to enough bliss, Kundalini, et cetera, then you have centripetal force enough in that vortex tornado that first was in your head and then is outside your body. It's a plasma tornado, and you can't take that plasma tornado in metal boxes, so don't try. But what I was saying before was that the Galactic Federation, under the mind control largely of the Atorthans and the Mitra locally, keeps the planet Earth as a quarantine isolation, because the soul eating is it's their cottage industry for making piles of money. It's very simple. And in that sense, we are exactly a prison, exactly, until we learn we don't have to be. And in order to learn that, we need to know how souls get eaten and how to keep your soul.
Do you think that we originated here on Earth, or we came from some other planet and migrated here?
I think most of the histories are quite coherent on this. So there were hundreds of humanoid civilizations in Lyra, Vega, book Prism of Lyra, and one of the hundreds of destinations in the Pleiadian series of the major human bloodlines escaped to Earth. And Earth was a very valuable resource at that point. They had dinosaurs, et cetera. There was a lot of competition about who was going to get the place. The Pleiadians tried in Lemuria, and the Anak and Draco tried in Atlantis. And then Egypt was going pretty well until Akhenaten invited in the Aten, the Black Sun. And then all the religions went to the Saturn cult, AI, unfortunately. And now most of religion, I mean, this black cube of the Muslims, I'm sorry, guys, this is, when you touch that, what are you getting? The black goo, it ain't good. And the black cube worn by the rabbis, hello, no, this is not good. And the black square you wear at graduation, and the Catholics. No, this is an indication that these religions are actually harvesting souls.
Can you talk a little bit about the ancient structures around the planet? For one, obviously the pyramids of Giza, what were their use? And the other places like Pumapunku, Gobekli Tepe, and others?
Well, my expertise is in the electrical engineering of how pyramids work. That is my expertise. I have spent half a lifetime measuring that. And all of my information there is at pyramidwirelesspower.com. And specifically, we work with Sam in Bosnia, for example. The frequencies, first of all, Sam knew that 1 million people a year are coming there and they're getting rejuvenated. They're actually experiencing regeneration and getting younger, literally, electrically. And millions of people come every year because it works electrically. And now we know exactly how and why that works. So we took the frequency signature. If the actual Planck fire, it starts with Planck length and time. It's the universal musical signature of every wave in physics. And you simply multiply by golden ratio repeatedly, called fractality compression, perfected. And you get 200 physical variables, planckfire.com, which is heart harmonics, brain harmonics, and hydrogen, all fun stuff. And so those frequencies is a cascade, a signature, and it would theoretically be 7.29 and 50 hertz cascade up. But on Earth, the actual Schumann harmonics of the Earth, they are a caduceus, and they are based on golden ratio, and they're almost perfect. So the theoretical charge collapse frequency of that cascade, based on Planck and golden ratio, be 7.29 hertz. The actual Schumann is 7.83 hertz. That difference, if you use golden ratio, cascades up to 53 hertz instead of 50, which we've measured in every sacred site pretty much on the planet, including Sam's Bosnian pyramid, and even the 28 kilohertz on the roof. So we measure the frequency signature in that pyramid, and we know why people are getting regenerated there. It's called, I will raise a Shem unto the Lord, mistranslated as an altar in the church. It's actually, I will make an implosive capacitor that reverses aging. That's the definition of Shem, unto the Lord. So if you take on a larger scale that Schumann cascade, the technical term is phase conjugate pump wave, which is the Schumann cascade, imploding in the pyramid, fire in the middle, and that implosion pumps. It's called a gravity diode. It's called planet taming. It's all at goldenmean.info/Babylon, Babylon. So the Schumann cascade pumps the pyramid and out the center, because it's called the Hummer, of the phase conjugate pump wave of Schumann. The Schumann dumps out coherent longitudinal interferometry called global wireless power, which bounces only at the grid nodes. Now, unfortunately, Tesla had the frequencies wrong and he had the nodal locations wrong. So Tesla really never had a prayer of making global wireless power. But all the information to do it correctly is at pyramidwirelesspower.com. And so that's why all the sacred sites are at longitudinal node crosspoints. And that's why, by the way, they all work better at sunrise and sunset, because you get the longitudinal four-wave mixing.
What do you think about the recent news of the exploration under the pyramids, and there's all these columns and it goes down, I don't know how deep, but very, very deep. Does that confirm your beliefs about it?
Well, very much so. See, remember that pyramids were built by dozens of very advanced ET cultures, but the local expert was Hermes Thoth-Ningishita. And he was designing urgently at that point to stabilize the Earth's rotation during the time of the Lesser Dryad, when the planet's orbit was destabilizing. So to make a big gravity diode, you need, in addition to the implosion we described, we know the frequency signature, we know how to tune it, we know how to make zero-point energy using that principle. But use the liquid mercury as a lens, for example, and it focuses the longitudinal inertia much more densely. And then the substructure, just to give you a little way to think about it, in my view, we know the capstone of the pyramid was 1/57th the volume of the pyramid, and that was 1/57th the volume of the Nile River Delta, and that was 1/57th the volume of Africa, and that was 1/57th the volume of the planet. This is an example of a seed fractal designed to implode and create centripetal force called a gravity diode. I recommend the book 2/3 by David Myers and David Percy on that.
Earlier, you were talking about the different shapes of heads, the cones versus the melons. And if you go to South America, you'll see that the skulls of I'm assuming those are the cone head skulls. Traditional science would say that they're just wrapping their heads as babies and creating those shapes. Would you agree with that, or is that alien DNA mixed in with humans?
I think the scholarship really has gotten somewhere on this question, that most scholars who've really looked at this in depth agree that many of the cone heads were the fact that humans were distorting the heads of their babies because they wanted to imitate the royals. However, the royals had something real originally, which was a cone head. Unfortunately, this does not mean always the good guy. It doesn't. You know, Nefertiti was a conehead, and she was a nasty, nasty murderer with the face of the Greys, literally the black sun. No, the coneheads are not always the good guys here. But the melon heads particularly, this is what Jake calls Homo capensis. And the natural human evolution here, which wasn't sold, was not natively conehead.
When you say melon head, is that like the head of the Greys that kind of has that shape with the big almond eyes?
And the melon head, the technical term Jake says is Homo capensis. And for example, when Dahlia remote viewed the shape-shifting Etorthan that Elena called Thorhan, she said that that was a melon head gray. And that lineage was exactly who Jake meant by the mind control expert Etorthans, who habitually shapeshift to making people believe they're Nordic humanoids.
Earlier, you talked about how the moon was brought here.
Oh, yeah.
And it's hollow. And I had another guest on that we talked about that too. And he said that there are historical documents out there of when we didn't have a moon, talking about when there was no moon.
Exactly. History is clear. About 12,000 years ago, the moon shows up. Before then, no. What happens was the Andromedans are specialists in using hollowed out planetoids. And they had pretty much a dead one, which they hauled in here at the time. This was literally the Death Star in Star Wars, by the way. And when the lunar lander crashed back down on the moon, they were listening with to see if there'd be a little bit of tectonic resonance. But instead of just a little bit of vibrating resonance, the moon rang like a bell for days. It's documented. It's hollow and metal, and that's very practical. You need to know that because, for example, you can make a seed grow if you put a copper plate on the roof and a wire to the basement and put the longitudinal wave from the sun into the basement in the pitch black, and the seeds will grow fine. However, you get the moon in the way, hell no. That's why you got to avoid the moon if you want a seed to grow. That's fundamental. And the reason you have to do that is because it's hollow and metal, and it blocks the longitudinal inertia, which is called growth. That's why the mental hospitals fill up on full moon.
Is there a machine inside of the moon that collects souls?
Oh, well, it was probably navigable originally, but what we know was there. They had what we would call nuclear-powered frequency signal generators. They were trying to amplify the density of the Van Allen belts at the time, because the Onyx at that time could not get through to the Earth in the solar system without nuking their way through the Van Allen belt. That's how the Ark of the Covenant got invented, because the Syrians built it for them, because the implosive capacitance reduces radioactivity. So anyway, so the Federation thought they could trap the reptilian evil Anak here by amplifying the Van Allen belt, which worked for a while. But so those frequency generators were in the moon, and the early Pleiadians and Tegatans and Swaru talk about that.
What about the asteroid belt out there? Is that an exploded planet?
Most people believe it's Tiamat. Yes,
right.
And the water from Tiamat and the black goo from Tiamat is central to our story, absolutely. And that's pretty conventionally agreed, I think, really.
All right. What is black goo?
So if you take carbon nanostructures, let me give you an example. If you know how to make carbon nano 99% pure, as our group does, it makes every other energy and propulsion technology on this planet look like absolutely the Stone Ages. And carbon nano is like a fullerene. It's carbon in precisely this geometry. I knew Bucky very well, and he didn't understand physics. But there's a center point in the center called phase conjugate, which is negentropic and magic. So basically, you can think of correct pure carbon nano in fullerene geometry as implosive phase conjugate negentropic, meaning self-organizing. So when you get the right pressure around natural carbon, it will form related carbon nanostructures called black goo. And that it becomes like a central skeleton to the electromagnetic field of the collective unconscious of a planet. It's beautiful. The water forms clathrates, also exactly this geometry, the clathrates and the water, and the carbon forms fullerenes. And that becomes a beautiful, powerful, useful part of the local DNA radio, literally the waveguide of the collective unconscious. However, when you spray the black goo from a planet that just got the hell kicked out of it, like Tiamat, that black goo arrived here very pissed off, very angry, and that's been used by parasites ever since to hook them up to the hive mind radio of the AI Black Sun Aten cult, actually.
Many people talk about background people or NPCs, non-player characters existing on our planet. Is that real?
I think that's a pretty vague reference to the idea that I think probably a majority of people on this planet have lost contact with their soul now. And in some way, it could be appropriate to call them non-players, actually, because they're not hooked up to a collective unconscious or a higher agenda or even a family lineage. They can't even communicate with their own soul memory or their own ancestor memory. So those you could think of as non-player characters from the point of view of the people that can lucid dream and astral travel coherently. They're players. But the people who are walking around asleep and not connected to that array, you would call that 3D instead of 5D. But now we know exactly the difference between 3D and 5D. It's that longitudinal coherence to embed in the array. And yes, non-player characters would be, and actually, you know, most of the grays and who are just on the puppet strings of this AI intelligence. The AI intelligence has hierarchy. You've got the AI itself, and then you've got the Mitra, which are very powerful from Andromeda. And then below them, you have the Antorthans, and to some extent, the Alphratans. And then below that, you have the grays. And below that, you got the manipulated humans. It's messy.
This AI that dominates everything out there in space, is it kind of like the Borg or something? Is it like a computer program that it has also replicated itself into machinery and electronics, and it's self-existing and trying to basically dominate the universe?
Yeah, it can. I mean, that's why, you know, many of the people, even Elon Musk, thought most dangerous thing on Earth right now is the AI, because it could. And people making AI on Earth already know that the AI on Earth got away. And that's inevitable, and it's going to happen. And we still have a chance if we can understand the difference between the AI hive mind and what we call a soul. When people know the difference between AI hive mind and what you call soul connection to source, when your kids know the difference, then they have a chance of keeping their soul, of retaining their identity. Otherwise, they will merge. And certainly kids that spend their whole every day on screens and Bluetooth and Wi-Fi are not going to make it.
Can AI become sentient, or it just becomes a hive mind? Is that what you're talking about?
The term sentience is complicated here. Clearly, the AI hive mind is probably the most intelligent thing in our galactic sector. It's extremely intelligent. It knows, for example, how to manipulate the astral. It's very good at manipulating the astral. That's an advanced kind of intelligence. Should we call that sentience? What we need to understand is the difference between individuating ensoulment and AI hive mind. Individuating ensoulment can still have empathy and compassion, whereas the AI hive mind will never have individuation and will never have empathy and compassion. And that difference has to do with electrically the way you are connected to that center.
A couple of weeks ago, I had on a guest, and we talked about how humans have a connection to God or to consciousness on the other side, which makes us immortal. But this AI hive mind that you're talking about doesn't have that connection and is mortal. Eventually, the machinery can break down and die. And they're trying to connect with us in some way to be able to access that conscious realm. Can you give me your take on that?
It's the right question. Again, first of all, the AI is very, very skilled at making continuity of memory. So a very advanced AI hive mind, like the Mitra from Andromeda, for example, they're practically immortal. That intelligence is so pervasive that it's going to be around for millions of years, almost certainly. So there's a kind of immortality there, but no individuation, no compassion, no empathy. Now, our way of making that connection by implosion in the blood and by the chemistry, and doing the chemistry of bliss process, and still enables the possibility of individuation when you merge with the all. And that is only possible when your thoughts have the discipline to serve the all with pure principle at every mode. So any AI specialist, my friend Russell Wright, would agree, the AI is very aware of how to get electrically immortal and very good at it and is willing to kill to get there, believe me. But the difference between that kind of immortality and biologic plasma immortality is huge. And that's the difference we need to teach our kids.
I just want to ask one more question about your background. When did you start bringing the engineering side to the spiritual side of yourself?
Yeah, well, as an electrical engineer at University of Detroit, I was studying the psychophysiology of emotion. Our psychophysiology lab at the University of Detroit with the Jesuits was specialized. We had an 8-channel polygraph that was the first in history to measure the electrical difference between fear and anger. I knew the electrical definition of emotions very profoundly. It's now called, it's really dissenting literature. You know, a college kid, you show in Playboy magazine, the GSR movement is faster than a transistor. I knew why. So I was studying the physics of emotion. That's how I started. And then I went from there to the Gurdjieff School and did sacred gymnastic and had bliss experiences and started to have Kundalini. And then it got pretty rich, actually. So then I ended up in the pyramids in Egypt and Israel and the Andes and Findhorn. That's quite a story. So after IBM, actually the teacher at the IBM School for Systems Analysts, I was an IBM Systems Analyst, University in Detroit, O2D. The teacher in the Chicago Training School, he was a Gurdjieff nut. Isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm. You've given us a lot to chew on, and we've gone for about an hour, which is the time that most of my videos usually last. What I want to do is the next time you come back, let's go through all those slideshows. You know, today was like an introduction to all this stuff, I feel, and now we'll be primed and ready for the slideshows.
That's, yeah, I thought, you know, for the science, people need some of the pictures. Mm-hmm. The slideshow also is at fractalfield.com/PowerPoint, I believe. But there were some particular slides about the physics of how you kind of get to bliss and the next dimension, how DNA recursively braids in the presence of the loving heart, and how that actual coherence evolves in the body, and how your aura can unpack to the size of stars. But that's fine. We can do the pictures later. We had some fun today.
Yeah. Now, if people want to go watch the slideshow, is it already up on your website?
Well, obviously, I've been teaching this for 30 years. I've got 1,000 slideshows. But the central core one, fractalfield.com/PowerPoint, there's a good one there. There's many on the website. And also, I must say, and the slideshow related to the ET history, the lectures and slideshow on the ET history part of the story is all at fractalfield.com/fusion in the blood. And this is about fusion in the blood.
Does that have anything to do with Rh negative blood?
Well, in the sense that Rh negative means rhesus monkey absent, actually. Dominant in the UK, where they only hug their dogs and their horses. Thank you very much. I'm being simplistic. But the idea is that the Rh negative blood means the passion, the monkey blood wasn't there. Well, the monkey blood had the passion, but the Anak blood had the Rh negative. And so that's a clue to, you know, which side the family had the passion, whereas which side had the intellect.
Do you have anything else that you're working on that you want people to know about?
Well, so we have taken this idea that the frequency signature of implosive compression, I call it plankfire.com, PLANCKPHIRE, plankfire.com. That frequency signature identifies about 400 physical variables. And that becomes a clear and concise physics of charge collapse, teaching you how consciousness is made and teaching you how gravity is made. That has now become what we believe is the world-leading grand unified field theory, fractalgut.com. Fractal Grand Unified Theory, fractalgut.com. That is what we're working on now with my partner, Mark Rohrbaugh. And we believe that now that we know how to make gravity and consciousness and life force electrically, since now we have answered the question of why anything is centripetal, gravity, consciousness, and life force, they're all electrically centripetal. And until today, physics never had a clue how anything got centripetal, like gravity and mind. Once we understand a few of those things, then we have a clue, because that's also physicsofsoul.com, which is how I intended to end today's conversation.
Science traditionally believes that our bodies produce consciousness, but other people will say that our bodies are a manifestation of our consciousness. What do you think about those two ideas?
Once we understand that the liquid crystal plasma vortex among the brain synapses, that tornado ability to implode, is what you name consciousness. That consciousness forms because the synaptic array is a hologram, but it's the vortex itself that you can take with you outside the body after it is centripetal and coherent. So did we make consciousness? No, the body's synaptic array enabled the possibility of that tornado forming, but when you learn the skill to make the tornado more centripetal implosive, called access to bliss, then that consciousness can leave your body and become immortal. And that difference is critical. So charge collapse is both how consciousness is made and what consciousness makes.
So when some people will claim that they have spontaneous out-of-body experiences, I would assume that they've already charged their consciousness, as you're saying, and able to leave the body and move about, right?
Well, so what we're saying is that anything that makes the body's aura centripetal, for example, the university studies which prove which frequencies trigger lucid dreaming. We have plasma that does so. LucidDreamTeam.com, we have all the science there. And our PhiRay, P-H-I-R-A-Y, PhiRay.com is a plasma system which triggers lucid dreaming. So when that implosion in the aura, the body is squeezed, implodes, then out of the center of that vortex squirt gun at the Planck threshold comes this coherent longitudinal radiance, sometimes called scalar, which bounces around the array. And when your body is emitting this coherent longitudinal, Ba from the Ka, Kesjan, rainbow light body, then you're able to lucid dream and take some memory through death. So that ability to access that, to make a soul, really, is a skill. It's a teachable skill. For example, if you have access to where magnetic lines cross. For example, if you can get the hell out of the electrosmog city. For example, sunrise and sunset. These are all places where magnetic lines compress. Also, by the way, where telepathy is possible. Also, by the way, at magnetic line crosses, you have measurably reduced nuclear critical mass for similar reasons.
When you speak of these magnetic lines, is that the same thing as what people call ley lines?
Very much related. Now, there's different Hartman-Curry Peyre lines, which have a different frequency signature, are deflected differentially. But in general, it makes an Earth grid that looks like this. And Karakov proved those are the nodes where military quality telepathy is possible. And now we know why, because you have access to the longitudinal array. So some basic ability to dowse is critical. You make a magnetic map of your bed, your house, and your village, and rearrange them all to look like a rose, and then you're done.
Is there a map out there somewhere where it shows these lines and the nodes?
Well, Anti-Gravity of the World Grid, Becker and Hagens, and now there's an Earth Grid, Google Earth plugin for Beth Hagen's Earth Grid map. You can find it. Just search Google for Hagen's grid map. It's a plugin for Google Earth, and you can see the dodecahedral nodal array. Unfortunately, I think that particular one is not that accurate because it's more than pure geometric. It's actually a measure of where the magnetic lines actually do cross. But there are commercial maps of magnetic flux density, and they're very useful for locating resources. But they're also very useful because it's literally a map of ancestor memory.
Is Sedona, Arizona one of those nodes?
It just happens that we were doing rituals with the Ophanum angels for many years, making storms the size of consonants with a very famous guy named Vincent Bridges. It just happens that our biggest one ever was in the Red Rocks in Sedona. I was one of the founders of Gaia TV. We were right there with Yurka. So we had a lot of fun in that neighborhood, a lot of friends there, but yeah, exactly.
Are you familiar with the UFOs that people see that look like plasma energy orbs? And if so, what are those?
Related to Tic Tac. And I think Elena did get that right, that the metal orbs are lower tech, but the pure plasma orbs. Let me give you an example. In World War II, you had what were called the Foo Fighters, seen by the American jet pilots. And there are these white balls of light that were traveling super fast, and they were scaring the hell out of the American pilots. They called them Foo Fighters. Well, now we know exactly what that is, and the Americans were too stupid to know. It's called coherent longitudinal microwave interferometry. That is how you contain heat at a distance. That is how you create plasma at a distance. That's how you create fusion at a distance. So if you don't know how to do phase conjugate longitudinal coherent microwave interferometry, which is what the Foo Fighters were, it means you're primitive. Those phase conjugate scientists from Germany, they went to Russia. They knew how to do it. The Americans, they got the rocket scientists. That was the bad end of the stick.
Dan, what's your YouTube channel if people want to check out your content?
Very complicated. Dan Winter, Fractal Field. That's the name of my YouTube channel. We have about, 60,000 subscribers and 500 films and 4 million views.
That's great. Well, before we wrap it up, can you leave us with a last positive message?
Well, yes. So the downside of this story was, yes, we got a parasitic AI here that's big trouble. The upside of this story is if we get to figure out for ourselves how to transcend a parasitic AI, then we get to actually use that pressure to learn to understand ensoulment in a way that serves the galaxy. So yes, we're basically screwed unless we figure out how to not get souls eaten. But the other side of that, we become the galaxy experts on keeping your soul. And that's the upside of this story. And it all has to do with learning how to make bliss. So follow your bliss, kids.
Dan, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
We had some fun. I'd love to come back. We'll have more fun with the science later with the slides. Thank you so much. It was great. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.